Good day. I'm Gemma F. Quintana and I will be presenting my required task 2, which talks about the challenges in assessment in K 12 math and science curriculum. The discussion today will revolve around the department order from the Department of Education. This is the policy guidelines on classroom assessment for the K 12 basic education program. And the memo number is DepEd Order number 8 series of 2015. Okay, so we'll go through the different key points of this DepEd order. First is the definition of assessment. According to DepEd, classroom assessment is an ongoing process of identifying, gathering, organizing, and interpreting quantitative and qualitative information about what learners know and can do. So there are keywords in their definition of what assessment is. So for DepEd, assessment is not only giving tests, but also interpreting those results. It's also not just a numbers game. It's not just about the scores. We're not only talking about quantitative data, but also qualitative information. And it's not only the cognitive part or what learners know. DepEd also wants us to assess what learners can do. So there is this focus on the performance or the skills part of the curriculum. Okay. Now, the theoretical basis of the DepEd order are that first, teachers and students are co-participants. So there's this equal footing between the teachers and the students now in the assessment process. It's not just all decided by the teacher. Rather, the teacher and the student try to develop these assessments together. And the goal of the assessment is to holistically measure the learner's current and developing activities. So it's not just about what they have now, but also they're developing. The DepEd also wants to emphasize the diversity of learners. That means there is a need for multiple ways of assessment and not just the traditional pen and paper type tests. DepEd also wants teachers to consider the learner's zone of proximal development. This is from Vygotsky's ideas. As for Vygotsky, he said that we have this idea of scaffolding, where we want students to move from being guided by teachers to being able to transfer their knowledge and skills independently in future situations. So there is an emphasis in the assessment guidelines in the students being able to apply the skills they've learned in the classroom into the real world. Okay. And the fifth point of DepEd is that our assessment should facilitate the development of 21st century skills like creativity and critical thinking. Okay. With these in mind, let's talk further about what the content of the DepEd order. What is being assessed? So it's not, as I've mentioned earlier, it's not just the cognitive part of the learner, but it's not only the content standards. There's also performance standards, learning competencies, and concept development. How are learners assessed? They can be assessed either individually, for example, through quizzes, written exercises, performances, models, or electronic presentations. Or they can also be assessed collaboratively, for example, through discussions, or role-playing, games, or other group activities. So the DepEd recommends a combination of individual and collaborative assessment. There are two types of assessment. One is formative, and the second one is summative. Formative is also what we call assessment for learning, which means that we use it for the teachers to make adjustments in the instruction. For example, if we find out the students have a low comprehension of a certain concept, then we have to spend more time in teaching that. And it's also assessment as learning because it gives the students a chance to reflect about their own progress. Formative assessment can be given before, during, or even after a lesson. And characteristically, formative assessment is informal. So it can be as simple as, just asking the class what their thoughts are on the lesson. Okay? Or it could be a short check-up quiz, just so you can see whether the students have understood the lesson for that day. Okay? So those are formative assessments. We can also have summative assessments, and this is what we call assessment of learning because we want to use it to describe the standards reached by the learner, whether they got a grade of very satisfactory, whether they get a grade of A, B, D, or F. Okay? And it also serves as basis for decisions about future learning and grading student achievement. So we use this to make decisions on whether we'll be able to promote the learner to the next grade, or in higher education, whether they'll be retained in their program. Summative tests are usually given at the end of a particular unit, and it's characteristically formal because these are typically standardized pen and paper tests, which is what we know as traditional assessment. In the K-12 curriculum, there are three components of summative assessment. One is the written work, which is composed of quizzes, okay, performance tasks, and quarterly assessment. So as you can see, the larger part of the component is performance task. That means that the K-12 curriculum is really focused on developing skills of the students, okay, because that is what is given priority in the grading components. Okay. The DepEd order also suggests these types, gives some examples of the assessment tools that can be used. Okay. So for written work, for example, in the subject of languages like English, Filipino, under written work, they can have unit tests, book or article reviews, essays, journals, letter writing, reaction or reflection papers, and reports. And for performance tasks, they can do campaigns, case studies, collages, compositions, debates, interviews, multimedia presentations, panel discussions, presentations. So there are a lot of assessment tools that can be chosen from, especially when we do performance tasks, because that is the bigger chunk of the assessment component. Okay, this is another example given by DepEd, and this one is for mathematics, which I find particularly interesting. Okay, so of course, there's again the written work component and the performance tasks. Some of the sample performance tasks that were suggested in mathematics are diagrams, mathematical investigatory projects, constructing graphs, multimedia presentations, outdoor math, probability experiments. So I think all of these performance tasks are great alternative assessment to especially see the skills of our students. This is another example for science. We also have written work and performance tasks. I've noticed that the DepEd recommends a lot of presentations and investigatory projects. So I think that's a skill that we have to really develop in our students, because as we know, our communication skills and critical thinking skills are really in demand in the world we live in. Okay. The DepEd order also specifies the grading system. Okay, so for grades 1 to 10, we can see that depending on the subject, okay, the majority of the grade will come from performance tasks. So if you can see, written work will just range from 20 to 40%. However, performance task will range from 40 to 60% of the grade. So I think this further highlights the emphasis given by DepEd on skills development. This one is for grades 11 to 12. Again, the percentage of performance tasks is really high. It's also here they also gave grading scale descriptors. For example, if the student got a 90 to 100, that is outstanding. 85 to 89 is very satisfactory. 80 to 84 is satisfactory. 75 to 79 is fairly satisfactory, and below 75 means did not meet expectations. We had a discussion in our lessons last week where my classmates shared that most of the students expect a grade of 9 of 9. It's like the teachers are trying to give higher grades to students, to please the parents and things like that, because there's this feeling that if a student gets an 85, that's already low. But if we are looking at the grading scale descriptors of DepEd, a grade of 80 is already satisfactory, and getting an 85 already means that the student is above average. So I think it's helpful to look back to this and ground our grading system to really match. Sometimes we tend to be skewed to the higher range because we don't want to make enemies out of anyone. All right, so this one is a good point to review. Aside from the cognitive skills and the performance skills, the DepEd order also outlines that the curriculum should also check or develop the core values of the students, specifically being makadiyos, makatao, makakalikasan, at makabansa. Those are our 4 core values being given attention in the K to 12 curriculum. So makadiyos means godliness. Okay, when the learner is able to express their spiritual beliefs while respecting the spiritual beliefs of others, and when they show adherence to ethical principles by upholding truth. Okay, makatao means that they are sensitive to individual and social and cultural differences, and they demonstrate contributions towards solidarity. Makakalikasan, of course, is being environmentally conscious. It means the learner cares for the environment and utilizes resources wisely, judiciously, and economically. Lastly, makabansa or patriotism means that the learner demonstrates pride in being a Filipino, expresses the rights and responsibilities of a Filipino citizen, and they also demonstrate appropriate behavior in carrying out activities in the school, community, and country. So the expression of these core values are also graded by the teacher. Okay. These are the markings specified by DepEd in grading the core values. AO is always observed, SO is sometimes observed, RO is rarely observed, and NO means not observed. Okay, for the reporting of grades, DepEd guidelines state that the summary of learner progress is shown quarterly to parents and guardians in a parent-teacher conference. And so there should be a quarterly PTA meeting to discuss the grades of students. And there is a caveat here, which is important for teachers. It's DepEd mandates that when a learner's raw scores are consistently below expectations, the parents or guardians must be informed not later than the 5th week of the quarter. So the teacher has a responsibility to keep the parents or guardians updated or informed about whether the students are performing well or not in school. So I think this is a huge responsibility for teachers. Okay. And the classroom assessment is reported to the child, the parents or the guardians, the remedial class teacher, and the teacher of the next grade level. Now, the next part will be sharing my personal experience in assessment. Okay. First, let me share the challenges I have seen in assessment. Okay. For me, what I've experienced is that assessments take time and effort to prepare and grade. When you think of an activity, you try to be novel, you want to take the students' interest. And also, aside from that, you also have to develop a rubric or a grading system so that the students know the level of expectations and or what they have to do, so that expectations are clearly communicated. So, designing the assessment task and creating the rubrics are quite time consuming, really, compared to, if you just make always get a quiz. Okay. And also, these elaborate or assessment tasks also take time to grade. For example, when one time when I asked students to create a portfolio, they each gave me this thick folder. So I had it took me quite a while to check all the outputs. So it takes a lot of time and effort on the part of our teacher of the teacher. And the second point is the students' anxiety towards tests. This is what I've noticed. So, especially if it's mathematics, if there's a test, you can just feel that the students are stressed, and sometimes that hinders their performance in an assessment. They get mental block, or sometimes they just try to that I think that they're not able to show their true level of cognition and performance if anxiety is holding them back. Okay. And the third one is that considering the blended learning setup and a lot of the assessment tasks that students do nowadays are done online, there is, of course, concerns on accuracy, of course, and integrity, because it's really easy for someone else to do students' activities. So that is a primary concern. And lastly, what I think about are is that there is a challenge to us teachers to keep up with the trends. We we want to use varied assessment tools that are suitable to Gen Z students. I just remembered one time when we had this final project in a language class, and I asked my students to do cosplay, and that they really loved. If you had asked them to do a report or a case study, they wouldn't have put in much effort. But since the task was to do a cosplay of the character that they liked, then uh, I could see that they really spent a lot of time and money for their costumes, because it was something that piqued their interest. So um, nowadays, using TikTok videos is also popular among students. So there is this challenge for us teachers to keep up with the pace or the trends that match our students. Okay, so let me share my suggestions for assessment, and these are from my own experience. I found that when the tasks are collaborative, when they are doing done in a group, or whether and when they are actually have to do something, the students are very active and involved. Okay. Another thing is that when mathematics is integrated with other disciplines, for example, art. One time I asked my students to create an artwork using mathematical patterns. So that produced a lot of awesome results. I can just see the creative juices flowing from them. So, and it also helped them realize that math is connected to art, music, sports. So there is this interdisciplinary assessment that is happening. And my best practice that I would like to suggest, this is a tool that I found was very helpful to my students, because they had this attitude that whenever they made a mistake, they feel really bad, and that makes them hate math more. So what I did was, I had them create a math improvement notebook. So whenever they had a quiz, okay, they would paste their quiz on this notebook, and then they would write the corrections to their answers. So I told them, it's okay if you make mistake. In your notebook, this is your chance to learn from your mistake. Mistakes are okay as long as you learn from them. So in this notebook, they reflect on why they made a mistake. Perhaps they just missed a decimal point, or perhaps they wrongly multiplied two digits. So this makes them realize that mathematics is not so bad, because you can improve, you can do better. And this alleviated their concerns about taking quizzes. And it's also a great tool, an assessment as learning, because as they are doing this math improvement notebook, they are learning what should be done correctly. So I really love this practice. And my students were less scared to make mistakes. They were less fearful of mathematics after doing this. So I would keep on doing this practice in my teaching. And to end my presentation, I would like to leave you with a quote. Good teaching is more a giving of right questions than a giving of right answers. This is from Joseph Albers, and I hope that as good teachers will always be asking the good questions. Thank you very much.